Okay, tonight we're going to talk about comparing and ordering integers. This is 1.4 in your pre-algebra book, and there are three words we need to know for this section. These are words that you will get familiar with over the course of your pre-algebra lives. The first one is integer. Now, integers include all of the whole numbers. You've used whole numbers, but all of the non-zero whole numbers, it includes their opposites, so they're negatives. So we have the whole numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, on, as far as you can go. Then we have the negative non-zero numbers also, as far as you can go. So those are integers. The absolute value of a number is its distance from zero. Now remember, a distance is always a positive measure. When we're measuring a room, we don't come up with negative measurements. We have positive measurements. So when we're measuring a number's distance from zero, whether it's negative number or positive number, it's still going to be a positive distance. So remember, absolute value is a distance, so it's always positive. Okay? Now, opposites are just exactly what they sound like. Opposites, if I've got a 1, well, the opposite of 1 would be negative 1. If I have negative 2, the opposite of negative 2 would be 2. So that makes a lot of sense. So again, integers, we're just talking about the whole numbers, including the negative non-zero whole numbers. We're talking about absolute value in distance, and then opposites with positives being the opposite of negative, and negatives being the opposite of positives. Okay, let's look at some examples. First thing we're going to do is greater than, less than, and so many people have issues knowing which way the arrow points. It's kind of like an arrow. The smaller end always points toward the smaller number. The bigger end back here always points toward the bigger number. Okay, so let's look at these. I've got a negative 5 and a positive 6. Well, obviously 6 is bigger than negative 5, so the point is going to point toward the smaller number. Here I've got negative 10 and negative 9. Well, negative 10 is farther from 0 than negative 9 is. On the negative side, if you're farther from 0, you're smaller. So negative 10 is definitely smaller than negative 9. Here we got 0 and negative 6. Well, 0 is definitely bigger than negative 6. So my arrow is going to point toward the smaller number, negative 6. And here, negative 8 is smaller than negative 7. It's further from 0, and on the negative side, when you're further from 0, you're smaller. So negative 8 is smaller than negative 7. Hopefully that refreshes our memory with greater than, less than. Next examples, write in order from least to greatest. That's from smallest to largest. Look at this first set of numbers here. If we're going to do that in order, what's the smallest number up there? Well, I've got two negatives, so those are smaller than the positives. But out of the two, the negative 6 is farther from 0. So negative 6 is the smallest. Then negative 3. Now I just take my positive numbers and I order them least to greatest. That's 0, and then 4, and then 7. And we are finished. This is least, the smallest, to the greatest in order. Look at the next example. Well, I've got three negative numbers. Which one's smallest? Well, the one that's farther from 0, which is negative 12. The next one, next smallest, is negative 8, getting bigger, negative 7. Then I've got two positive numbers. That's obvious, 1 and 4. Okay, that's ordering from least to greatest. Absolute value of a number. Remember, I said the absolute value is the distance from 0. The number's distance from 0. Okay, so it's a positive answer. No matter with what kind of number you're dealing with, you're going to get a positive answer. So let's look at 24. How far is 24 from 0? Well, that's pretty easy. It's 24 units. So 24 is the absolute value of 24. Now, how far is negative 33 from 0? Well, it's a positive measurement, but it's 33. 33 units from 0. So the absolute value of negative number is a positive. Look at number 3, negative 12. How far is negative 12 from 0? Well, 12 units. How far is 105 from 0? Well, 105 units. Notice all of these are positive. Okay, absolute value is a distance. It gives you a positive answer. Look at example 4. State the opposite. Now these are ones everyone likes because they seem so simple. Well, the opposite of 7. -7. Opposite of 5, +5. Opposite of -2, I'm sorry, that was the opposite of -5, +5. Opposite of -2, +2. Opposite of 17, -17. Okay? So we've seen opposites, absolute value, working with integers. Let's look at the next one. Evaluate the expression with x is -3. Now with each of these, what I want you to do is use that mathematical term we've been using, substitute. Starts with an S, substitute. Okay, so we want to do that first before we figure anything out. So over here, I'm going to substitute -3 for x. So these bars are absolute. This stands for absolute value. When you see two bars like this, here and here, that means the absolute value of the number. So we're just going to put -3 in there because we're substituting for x, and we're going to keep +8. Now, what's the distance from 0 to -3? Well, it's +3. Now I can add 3 to 8, and I'm writing crooked, but that's okay. 8 plus 3 is 11. There's our answer. Let's look at the next one. Okay, let's substitute -3 for x. So I have the absolute value of -3 plus the absolute value of -1. Well, what's the distance from 0 to -3? Well, it's 3. What's the distance of -1 from 0? Well, it's just 1. 3 plus 1 is equal to 4. Okay, pretty simple, huh? Look at the next one. 20, let's substitute 20 minus the square root of -3. Okay, now, what's the distance from 0 to -3? Well, it's 3. So 20 minus 3. I have to keep this minus sign right here. Okay? I have to keep it. Okay, this has nothing to do with the absolute value. Only the -3 inside the absolute value is affected by that. The one outside, this minus sign here, I have to keep. Okay, so I get a +3 when I find the absolute value of -3, but I still have this minus sign here. So 20 minus 3 is equal to 17. Again, substitute and then work step by step. Okay, let's look at another example here. We've got two variables. Okay, let's substitute first before we try to figure anything out. Keep the minus sign. Now a is -2. Okay, now notice, sometimes it helps to put in parentheses what you're substituting. Okay, but notice I had to keep this minus sign because it was here before. Even though 2 has a negative on it up here, this minus sign has to stay here because it's just coming down. Okay, this minus sign is here, and then absolute value of -13. Okay, now when I have two minus signs together, that gives me a positive number. So that gives me +2. Okay, minus, now what's the absolute value of -13? It's +13. Okay, then 2 minus 13, that gives me -11. Now, we're not really delving into negative numbers right now, so if you don't quite understand it, that's fine. I just made this up, and without working through it, I realized it's a negative answer. We haven't quite covered negative numbers, so don't really worry too much about that right now because you'll get it later. Okay, let's look at this next one. I've got absolute value of -b, so that's the absolute value of -13. This negative I had to keep. It doesn't change no matter what this is in front of the 13. Here's a negative, here's a negative, so I have two of them. Well, two negatives. It really doesn't matter what's inside the bars because when I get rid of the bars, it's positive. But two negatives make a positive, so that's the same as the absolute value of 13, which is equal to 13. And that is absolute value. I think that's all of our examples today. That's basically what we're covering. I hope this helps. Again, absolute value, opposites, and integers. Those are the three terms that we're concerned about today, and you will see those forever and ever, at least until you're out of high school.